Now, I would like to open to see if there are any questions. Does anybody have any questions or reflections? I would love to answer them if there are any. There are. I don't go into them in the book. Earlier in the book, I talk about the emotions of fear and shame before I get to the trauma triangle. So when I speak about fear and shame, I believe these are blocker emotions to our deeper experience. And as we heal, we constantly need to meet the fear and meet the shame, let them dissolve, and it will be then that the powerlessness, the anger, and the grief emerge. And it will be through meeting those that we can then drop in to really deal with the inherited voice and also the wound of separation. I hope that makes sense. An emotion that I don't talk about much in the book is disgust, and that is another emotion that is very, very common. And I hope to write a book all about disgust one day, but that's not in the book. I hope that that helps. Let me know if there's a follow-up question. A natural tension. I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but I do think that we tend to twist ourselves in knots in order to belong. So I think that that's what he's referring to. So we need each other. We need to belong. It is a biological imperative that we have attachment and connections. And so if that's not offered to us freely when we are young, we will lose authenticity trying to seek it or create it or make more of it. There's an entire section of the book that is called trust. So I think when our nervous system is on fire, it's really hard to trust. And our relationship to trust becomes incredibly convoluted. So either there's no trust at all, or we trust way too quickly, or we ignore red flags and we trust the red flags. So learning to tune into our somatic signals and our nervous system actually allows us to build trust in our experience over time. And as we learn to trust our own signals, we learn to discern, and then we can trust as well. But it is a journey. And, you know, healthy trust isn't meant to happen instantly. And this is a really interesting thing in the modern paradigm. We're told this is a psychologically safe space. It's okay to be vulnerable and trust. And actually, most of the time, that's not necessarily true. So really, if we're talking about trust, we have to allow time, we have to allow discernment, and we have to allow choice. That's nice. So you're setting boundaries with this aspect of yourself. I think learning to do this is really important. I definitely had parts of myself or fragments that would hijack my experience and leading me to do all kinds of crappy things, excuse my language, that weren't really in my best interest and weren't necessarily always respectful of other people's time and energy as well. So I think learning to set compassionate boundaries with ourselves is really important. And I think there's a fine line between setting the boundary and actually shaming or ignoring parts of ourselves. So that's been an interesting kind of nuanced journey for me. How do I hear my fragment and see it and see how I can meet its need, and also let it know very gently when actually the way it wants to engage is not appropriate and I will not allow it. So this is a process of reparenting. I think getting a gauge on our experience of safety or threat is a really good place to start. So am I perceiving threat or safety, and is there threat around me or is there not? And once we understand that, that's a really good point of departure. The next question we can ask ourselves if we are sensing threat is, well, how can I help myself feel a little safer in this moment? What do I need to do? And then the next piece, I think, is a very non-linear journey of looking back at all the ways our prologue to self has formed us. And I think the journey will be different depending on how complex our trauma is. And also how long it has been decontextualizing. So the longer that something is suppressed, the more diffuse and kind of sneaky it becomes in the way it spreads through us. But I think, it can also be helpful to go back through our story and identify key milestones or experiences that may have caused this. But there are often a lot of very nuanced, subtle experiences that we wouldn't necessarily classify as traumatic or oppressive that actually are. So I think it's like going back over it again and again, gently, gently. I think emotional intelligence is a really important skill for us to learn. And I think emotional intelligence is not only about learning the signatures of emotions and learning how to name them, but how they show up inside us and color our experience. So when we are holding suppressed emotions, the way we see the world is different, and the way we will express if there is an emotion at the core of our experience is different. So absolutely learning to tune into how emotions show up inside us and in others will help us not only with our own healing, but with relational intelligence as well. I think vulnerability is a topic that we should run many sessions on. I did not share any stories publicly until such a point that I felt I had really integrated them. And this took a really long time. And for me, there was also actually many years of sort of testing the waters. So there's a very interesting trend towards vulnerability now, particularly on social media. So everybody's sharing their mental health and their trauma stories. But something I sort of realize is social media is not a safe space. And actually many safe spaces that are labeled safe spaces are not. So just because someone or something tells us that it's a safe space doesn't mean that's true. And in order for us to truly feel safe with our vulnerability, number one, we have to check what is our capacity for activation while sharing these stories, and what are our expectations of the way they will be received. Because when we're sharing publicly, we can't guarantee the kind of response we will get. And if our sharing is still deriving from a part of us that is really deeply seeking care, and resonance, and we don't get that, we can re-traumatize ourselves through our sharing. And this is something I see very commonly, people openly sharing and sharing and sharing, but they're not being met the way they want. And so it can be harmful. So for me, I started sharing in very small ways, in much smaller circles, about 5 years ago only. And as this journey towards the book has happened, I've had to check myself a number of times and think, well, am I okay to share this? And will I be okay if people tear my story apart? And I think I can say yes right now, but let's see what happens when more and more people read the book. There's a really there's a part of the book that's really dedicated towards this. And one of my biggest wishes is to work more deeply in this space, and it's just starting. Number one is I think that we need to have systems collaborating together. So there are all these different systems and frameworks, and now I'll speak specifically towards sort of healthcare and mental health care, where there are all these systems and different frameworks that are not working together and also sometimes contradicting each other. And so patients are ping-ponging between different systems and feeling like they're being kicked around. So what I would like to see is that all the different frameworks and modalities come together under one greater, I guess, education piece around trauma-informed care, so that they can understand the patient experience and welcome the client or the patient to move towards or through different systems. So, for example, something that's really common is that some mental health professionals aren't really a fan of healers or coaches, or there's all these different things going on. But the truth is, there's a place for all care. We need all the care that we can get. And particularly what I notice is, there's amazing healing work going on in the healing spaces of healers or the rooms of physiotherapists, and there is mental health content emerging and trauma content emerging, even if these practitioners aren't specifically looking for it. And what's being offered in these particular spaces is a different level of care, the holding of space, the quiet, the attention to the body. And so what I would like to see is that trauma and trauma-informed care becomes something greater that holds all of the well-meaning systems together. So, I prefer not to talk clinically because I'm not qualified to do that, but absolutely we are dealing with now generations of trauma on many levels. And I believe right now our generation's task is to actually process that. So we are a transformative generation. Our job is to do our trauma healing work so that we do not actually pass it on to our children. This is the work of our generation, and our healing work is going to integrate in the next generation if we do it well. And I actually believe that it's our children's children, our grandbabies, that are going to go on and create a world that we probably can't even imagine right now. So absolutely, there's such an intergenerational component. This is a really complicated question. Again, I cannot give sort of a clinical perspective, but I think it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of complex processing. When we have gone through this level of trauma, there's so many different threads that we need to work with, but we can start by beginning to invite a sense of safety through our relating dynamic. And something that's also going to be really required is discharge through the physical body. So I really believe that we need to bring a very somatic component to healing work. So I talked about the nervous system earlier. When we are experiencing threat and when that charge is kind of trapped inside us, it decontextualizes in so many ways. And there are some very beautiful somatic modalities for allowing that charge to release safely. So this is something I'd really invite for exploration. I would say that any symptoms or expressions that do not resolve with a little mainstream intervention and self-care will often have an origin of trauma. So if the tools for regulation aren't working, there's usually going to be a root of trauma. So absolutely, I would be exploring. When I teach therapists and coaches, one of the core focuses of my training is on story navigation and how to look for signs and manifestations of trauma as they decontextualize through certain layers. And there will be core points that have triggered trauma, and then there will be core points that cause the trauma to no longer be able to be held. And usually that's when people come to seek therapy from me and my team at Illuma, when they have been suppressing and coping with the trauma for a very long time, but some life triggers come along and blown it all apart. And I believe that's what we're witnessing around the world right now, because of COVID and because of some of the other really big global events going on in the world. These have sort of shattered all of our coping mechanisms. And so we're seeing everybody's trauma literally exploding. So now's the time to heal. I was in so many unsafe spaces. So that I didn't have the safe spaces I need, and I was re-traumatized again and again and again. And back during my journey, people were not talking about trauma. People were not creating safe spaces. So I had to test the waters and learn, oops, this one's not truly safe. So it was an epic and not graceful journey of making mistakes and trusting the wrong people. And trust is a chapter in the book, in the first part of the book. I think when we have trauma, either we find it impossible to trust, or we blindly trust. We just trust right away, or we trust too quickly. We don't allow time. So I really believe in this dipping the toe in or the finger in. Is this safe? Was this well received? My safest place is my therapist, and I've been seeing her for over 5 years every single week. Before her, I saw so many therapists that were not truly safe places, that had all kinds of sort of triggers coming up and transference and re-traumatization. So it took me a really long time to find her. And same with friendships. I've done the wrong thing. I've trusted the wrong people because I didn't know any better. And it's just been through testing and time. You know, we shouldn't trust so quickly. There's a lot of sort of information again through social media at the moment that sort of tells us we should trust and we should be vulnerable and we should share because this is a psychologically safe place. And actually, anyone who tells us that we should have psychological safety like this is giving us misinformation. We have to learn and discern through time who's truly safe, and our trust and our vulnerability should only emerge in direct proportion to how truly safe we feel. We cannot magic it. So over time, I've had my therapist and I've slowly built a really close inner circle of friends, and also my beautiful 2 employees, Viv and Marianne, who are here. They're my safe people too. But I had to create that. And there's a piece there which is all around, orienting away from the people who are not safe. That is a piece of relational restructuring. And so if our map for love is full of all these organizing principles and markers that tell us unsafe people are safe, we're going to have to look at that and challenge that and move towards the people who are truly safe. Another bit in this sort of very complex piece is sometimes when we meet safe people, when we've never truly felt safe, seen and heard before, we will trigger into our survival responses. And so either we will shut down and we will repel, or something in our miscalibrated self will say that this person is dangerous, and we will have some kind of threat response, and that can show up in many different ways. So I think it's a bit of a journey. Thank you so much for all of the questions. In the meantime, thank you so much for taking time to show up and engage with me. I'm very grateful. This is a really big milestone, not only in my career, but in my life, to share this work. And I really look forward to your reflections as you read. If you have not already bought the book, you can buy it on Amazon in Singapore. You can buy it now, pre-order for the US. It will be delivered on September 10. And if you're anywhere else in the world, we will ship directly to you from Singapore. So you can order on my website. I'm really looking forward to sharing a lot more content in relation to the book and trauma healing, and also my up and coming trip to the US to do some very cool trauma work in many different ways. So yeah, thank you for supporting me. I wouldn't be here without you. Have a beautiful day.